Hey guys, this is lesson 6.1, task 3, and we're asked to translate between rational exponents and radical expressions. You can rewrite an algebraic expression with radicals as algebraic expressions with rational exponents and vice versa. Some examples are shown. All right, example 1, fourth root of r cubed equals r to the 3/4 power. All right, and then there's example 2. We've got in parentheses 2xy all raised to the 5/3 power. All right, it says in example 1, if the result is a real number, can r be any real number? Explain. All right, so here r is under the radical, and this is an even index. So remember, we cannot have a negative number r. So we're going to say no, r cannot be negative. All right, this one, I guess it doesn't check it. It just lets you put in an example. So no, the value of r cannot be negative because it is an even root. So anytime the index is even, is 4, remember we talked about this before, like if you have a square root of -16, the square root of -16 but produces an imaginary answer. Well, any even root does the same thing. So because this is an index of 4, this has to be non-negative in order for it to be a real number. Okay? All right, example 2, if the result is in example 2, if the result is a real number, can x and y be any real number? So x and y is under the radical. But for example 2, the index is a 3. So a 3, remember 2 to the 3rd is 8, but -2 to the 3rd is -8. So it still produces a real number. So the answer to this one is yes. Let's see what they say. Yes, every real number has a real cube root. So x and y can each be any real number. All right, that's all for task 3. We're going to move on to some examples. All right, guys, we're going to look at a couple examples here of rational exponents and nth roots. All right, so this question says, show two different ways to evaluate 216 to the 2/3 power. So we know that we can write this in multiple ways from the examples in the task. We can write this as the cube root of 216 squared, or we can write it as cube root of 216, put it in parentheses, and square it. So basically this is two different ways to write it, but it just tells you which order to do it. This one says we're going to square it first. This one says we're going to do the cube root first and then square it. But you can do it either way and you're still going to get the answer. Also, if you remember, I told you you could also put it in your calculator as 216, raise it to the 2/3 power, and if you do that in your calculator, you would also get the result that you want. So there's 3 different ways. All right, let's move on to the next examples here. All right, it says write each expression as a radical expression. All right, so we can see that this is in exponential form because it is raised to an exponent, and we simply want to rewrite it in radical form. All right, so remember that the denominator is the index, so it's going to be 4th root of 49 to the 7th power. And again, it doesn't matter if you do that first or last. Make sure this number is the index. You don't want it to be 4 times that. It's got to be that little number inside of the root there to represent that. Then it says, if the expression is equivalent to an integer, write that integer. All right, so let's see if it is equivalent to an integer or not. So we're going to do math. Well, let's turn this on first. So let's go to math, and we go to nth root power here. So I'm going to have to put in my power first. Let me go back here, clear. So I'm going to do 4th root, because I got a 4th root. And then if I go to my nth root here, it turns that 4 into my 4th power. So I'm going to do 49. And then I'm going to raise that to the 7th power. and hit enter. And this says that the answer is 907.49. So that is an approximate answer there, if I did that correctly. And so since it doesn't have an integer answer, we're not going to write an answer down. All right, so let's look at the next example here. So we're going to write the next one as the square root of 100 cubed. And if I check that, let's see if that has an integer. So we're going to do square root square root's in blue here. Let me see. Square root of 100 raised to the third power. And that's going to give me 1,000. That is an integer, so we would write that as 1,000. All right, so next example says, write each expression as an expression with a rational exponent. So this time we're writing it in exponential form. So we're given radical form. We're going to write it in exponential form. If the expression is equivalent to an integer, write that integer. All right, so let's go ahead and rewrite both of these first, and then we'll check them on the calculator to see if we get an integer answer. All right, so remember this is your denominator. The index is your denominator, so I'm going to have 243 to the 3/5 power. And I'm going to have negative 216. That has to be in parentheses because it's negative to the 2/3 power. All right, then we're going to check to see if that's an integer exponent. And if it is, we're going to write it down. So I'm going to do 243 raised to the 3/5 power. 243 to the 3/5 power is 27. So I am going to write 27 here. And let's check the other one. So the other one says negative 216. I'm going to slide this over a bit. So I'm going to have negative 216 in parentheses, and I'm going to raise that to the 2/3 power. And I'll put that in parentheses too, just because it's dividing. I want to make sure it does it correctly, and that gives me 36. So that one is also an integer, so 36 here. All right, that's all for the examples. If you have any questions, please let me know.